The wind carried the scent of dust and distant rain across the vast plains of the Blackfoot River Wildlife Sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of Wyoming wilderness that served as a last refuge for animals with nowhere else to go. But even here in this place of second chances there were limits, and Pen 9 was the very definition of a limit. Inside its triple reinforced steel fences lived Sheaf, a 2,000-pound bull bison, who was less an animal and more a force of nature trapped in a cage of simmering rage. His hide was a tapestry of old scars, a roadmap of a brutal past with poachers and abusive owners. One magnificent horn was splintered at the tip, a permanent reminder of a fight he had both won and lost. He had arrived at the sanctuary 2 years ago, a whirlwind of fury and fear, having been confiscated from a private owner who used him for legal blood sport. He had gored 2 handlers during the transfer, and since then no one had dared enter his enclosure. That bison isn't just wild, he's broken in a way that can't be fixed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you," said Sam Holloway, the sanctuary's head ranger and a man who had spent 30 years working with the most dangerous wildlife in North America. There's a difference between an animal's natural aggression and the kind of hate you see in his eyes. That's learned hate. It doesn't fade. Sam stood with David Miller, a visitor whose own quiet desperation seemed to mirror the desolate landscape around them. David watched the massive bison pace the fence line, his every step a tremor of contained violence. "We've tried everything," Sam continued, his voice a low gravelly rumble. "Enrichment activities, different types of feed. We even brought in a behavioral specialist from the university." She took one look at him and said, "Our only humane option was euthanization. We haven't done it because we're a sanctuary, not a slaughterhouse, but every day he's here is a risk to my staff." David nodded, his gaze shifting from the formidable beast to the small boy sitting on a bench a few yards away. His 7-year-old son, Leo, hadn't spoken a word in the 2 years since the car accident that had claimed his mother. His silence was a wall. David didn't know how to breach. Therapists had called it selective mutism, a psychological prison built from trauma. David had brought him to the sanctuary as a last desperate hope, a final prayer that the raw, untamed power of nature might reach his son in a way that words and doctors could not. Leo wasn't looking at the other animals, the playful otters, the majestic eagles, or the graceful deer. His entire being was focused on the lone bison in Pen 9. His small face was a mask of concentration, his blue eyes wide with an emotion David couldn't decipher. It wasn't fear, it was something closer to recognition, as if the boy saw a kindred spirit in the magnificent broken creature. "Keep him back, David," Sam warned, his eyes on Leo. "I don't want him any closer to that fence. Chief is charged at people standing farther away than that. He doesn't give a warning." David placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder, but the boy didn't flinch or look away. His attention was utterly captivated by the pacing bull inside the pen. Sheaf suddenly stopped his relentless march. He turned his massive head, and for the first time his dark, intelligent eyes seemed to lock onto the small, silent boy. The sanctuary fell silent. The wind died down, and for a moment that stretched into an eternity, it felt as if the two of them were the only beings in the entire world. The bison didn't snort or paw the ground. He didn't lower his head to charge. He simply stood and stared, and in his eyes Sam Holloway saw something he had never seen before. Not the familiar blaze of rage, but a flicker of something else. Something that looked almost like confusion or curiosity. "Well, I'll be," Sam whispered under his breath. David felt a lump form in his throat. His son had shown more interest in this one animal than he had in anything over the past 2 years. It was a fragile spark, but it was the first spark he had seen in a very long time. That evening, as David tucked Leo into his bed in their small rented cabin near the sanctuary, the boy gestured toward a book on the nightstand, a picture book about North American animals. David opened it, and Leo pointed to the page with the bison. "You liked him, didn't you?" David asked softly. Leo nodded, his eyes shining with an intensity that was both hopeful and heartbreaking as Leo fell asleep. David sat on the porch, staring out at the vast star-filled Wyoming sky. He thought about the two silent beings he had witnessed that day, the boy who couldn't speak, and the beast who only spoke the language of violence, and he wondered if maybe they shared a language that the rest of the world had simply forgotten how to hear. Have you ever felt a connection so deep it didn't need words? Do you believe that some souls can recognize each other across the boundaries of species and silence? In the weeks that followed, visiting Chief became a daily ritual for David and Leo. Every morning after a quiet breakfast, they would walk to the edge of the sanctuary, where the bison's enclosure stood like a fortress against the rolling plains. Sam, the head ranger, had grown accustomed to their presence. At first he had watched them with a hawk's vigilance, his hand always near the radio ready to call for backup. But as the days turned into weeks, his apprehension slowly softened into a kind of grudging respect. Leo never tried to get too close. He would simply find his usual spot on the wooden bench a safe 20 yards from the fence and sit for hours. He brought no toys, no books, no distractions. He just watched the massive bison with a quiet, unwavering focus. And Chief in turn began to change. His behavior was no longer the relentless pacing of a caged storm. Instead, he would often graze in the part of the enclosure closest to the boy or lie down in the dust, his massive head facing the silent child as if he were standing vigil. "It's the strangest thing I've ever seen," Sam admitted to David one afternoon, leaning against the railing of the observation deck. "Before you two started coming, he'd spend all day charging the fences anytime a truck drove past. Now he just seems, I don't know, calmer. He watches the boy like he's expecting something." David had noticed it too, a subtle shift in the atmosphere around Pen 9. The air was still charged with power, but the undercurrent of violent rage had been replaced by something else, a heavy, profound sadness that seemed to emanate from the giant beast. He started researching Chief's history, digging deeper than the sanctuary's initial reports. He learned that the poachers who had first captured him as a calf had killed his mother in front of him. He had then been sold to a series of owners who used electric prods and sharpened sticks to train him for the illegal fighting rings. His aggression wasn't just a trait, it was a scar tissue built over a foundation of unimaginable trauma. David began reading the information aloud to Leo at night, pointing to maps showing where Chief had come from, explaining the cruelty the bison had endured. Leo would listen, his expression unreadable, but his eyes absorbing every detail. One afternoon, a sudden Wyoming thunderstorm rolled in with terrifying speed. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled through the sanctuary, sending staff scrambling to secure enclosures and equipment. David grabbed Leo's hand. "Come on, son, we need to get back to the cabin." But Leo pulled his hand away, his eyes fixed on Chief's enclosure. The bison was agitated by the storm, charging back and forth, his powerful snorts lost in the rising wind. A bolt of lightning struck a tall pine tree near the enclosure. With an explosive crack, the ancient tree shuddered and then began to fall, crashing directly onto a section of the reinforced fence. The sound of snapping steel and splintering wood echoed through the storm. "Oh my God!" Sam yelled from the ranger station, running out into the deluge. "The fence is down, David, get Leo out of here now." But in the chaos and confusion, something unthinkable happened. Leo wasn't by his father's side anymore. He was running not away from the danger, but toward it, toward the downed fence, toward the terrified 2,000-pound bull bison, who was now disoriented and enraged by the storm and the breach in his prison. "Leo, no!" David screamed, a raw cry of pure terror that was ripped away by the wind. He sprinted after his son, his heart hammering against his ribs, convinced he was about to watch his worst nightmare unfold for the second time in his life. Sam was right behind him, his face a grim mask of fear. They were too far away. They wouldn't make it in time. Chief saw the small figure of the boy scrambling through the broken fence into his enclosure. His training, his trauma, his rage, all of it surfaced in a blind panic. He lowered his massive head, his one good horn aimed like a spear, and he charged the rangers. And David could only watch in horror as the giant beast thundered toward the small helpless boy. But then just feet from Leo, something impossible occurred. The bison skidded to a halt, his hooves tearing up the muddy ground. He stood over the boy, his massive frame heaving, his breath coming in ragged snorts. But he didn't attack. He didn't gore the child. Instead, he did something that defied all logic. He turned his body, positioning himself between Leo and the thrashing broken section of the fence. Where the wind and rain were tearing at the exposed wires, he became a living shield, a 2,000-pound wall of muscle and bone, protecting the silent child from the storm. David and Sam stopped in their tracks, stunned into silence through the sheets of rain. They saw Leo look up at the giant beast standing over him, and without a trace of fear, the boy reached up his small hand and placed it on the bison's wet, scarred muzzle. Chief flinched for a second, then leaned into the touch, a low rumbling sound starting deep in his chest. It was a sound of pain, of sorrow, but also of something else. Something that sounded almost like relief. Do you believe that, in moments of chaos, the purest instincts can override years of trauma, and that true protection comes not from walls of steel, but from an unexpected connection of the heart? The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a world washed clean and a silence that felt heavy with miracle. The site in Pen 9 held every sanctuary worker captive. David and Sam stood frozen just outside the broken fence, their earlier terror replaced by a profound and staggering awe. Leo was still inside the enclosure. His small hand resting on the cheek of the giant bison chief remained perfectly still, a living statue of protective gentleness. His massive head was lowered, and his dark eyes, which had always blazed with rage, were now soft and full of a weary intelligence. The low rumble in his chest continued, a steady vibration that seemed to calm not just the boy, but the very air around them. "Don't move," Sam whispered into his radio, his voice trembling. "Everyone stay back, just give them space." Slowly, David took a step toward the broken fence, his heart a painful mix of fear and overwhelming love. "Leo," he said softly, trying to keep his voice from breaking. "Son, can you come here, please?" Leo didn't look at his father. He looked up at the giant bison as if asking for permission. Chief nudged the boy's hand gently with his nose, then took a single deliberate step back, creating a clear path for Leo to walk out. The boy turned and walked calmly toward his father, his small boots making soft prints in the wet earth. When he reached the fence, David swept him up into his arms, holding him so tightly he could feel the boy's small heart beating against his own. "Are you okay?" David whispered, burying his face in Leo's hair. "You're okay." Leo just nodded, and for the first time in 2 years, a small smile touched the corners of his lips as he looked back at the bison, who stood watching them from the center of the enclosure. The story of what happened during the storm spread through the sanctuary like a legend, whispered from one stunned staff member to another. The impossible had happened. The untamable beast had not only spared a child, but had protected him. The sanctuary board called an emergency meeting. The incident was a massive liability, the downed fence, a clear danger. But it was also something else. It was a breakthrough that no one could ignore. Dr. Alistair Finch, the behavioral specialist who had previously recommended euthanasia, flew in from the university. After hearing the news, he spent hours reviewing the footage from the sanctuary security cameras, which had captured the entire event. "This is unprecedented," he said to David and Sam, his clinical demeanor completely gone, replaced by genuine wonder. "In all my years of research, I've never seen a case of interspecies protective behavior this pronounced in an animal with such a severe history of trauma. It's as if the boy's complete lack of fear bypassed all the animal's conditioned responses. He didn't perceive the child as a threat, so his foundational instincts, the instinct to protect the young and vulnerable, took over. The decision was made to repair the fence, but to also create a special supervised program for Leo and Chief. Under Dr. Finch's guidance, a smaller, secure observation area was built inside the main enclosure, allowing Leo to be with the bison without the risk of an open fence. David had to sign a stack of liability waivers that made his hands shake, but when he saw the look of quiet joy on Leo's face as he sat inside the new area with Chief lying peacefully just feet away, he knew he had made the right choice. Their sessions became the heart of the sanctuary's new research program on trauma recovery. Chief's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. His stress levels plummeted, he stopped charging at trucks, and his general health improved dramatically. The deep rage in his eyes was replaced by a calm, watchful intelligence. But the most significant change was in Leo. The boy who had been trapped in a world of silence began to emerge. He started using hand gestures to communicate with David and the sanctuary staff. He would point to things he found interesting and would even make small sounds of contentment when he was with Chief. He started drawing pictures, not the dark scribbles his therapists were used to, but vibrant, colorful drawings of the sanctuary, of the plains, and always of a giant bison standing under a wide-open sky. He's creating a new narrative for himself, Dr. Finch explained to David. Before, his world was defined by the trauma. Now it's being defined by this connection, by this powerful bond he's forming. He's replacing the memories of fear with memories of trust and protection. The breakthrough everyone had been praying for came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Leo was sitting with Chief, brushing the bison's thick winter coat with a long-handled brush, a task that the giant beast seemed to enjoy immensely. David was watching from the observation deck when he saw Leo lean forward and whisper something to the bison. David's heart stopped. He strained to hear, but he was too far away. Later that evening, as he was putting Leo to bed, the boy turned to him, his blue eyes clear and direct. "His name is Chief," Leo said, his voice soft and a little rusty from 2 years of disuse. But it was clear, and it was real. David dropped to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he pulled his son into a hug. He didn't say anything. He just held on tight, listening to the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The sound of his son's voice returning from the wilderness of silence. Have you ever witnessed a moment so miraculous it changed everything you believed about the limits of healing? Do you think that sometimes the deepest wounds can only be reached by a love that has no words? The news of Leo's breakthrough and Chief's transformation turned the Blackfoot River Wildlife Sanctuary into a place of pilgrimage, a beacon of hope for people who had begun to lose faith in miracles. Families with special needs, children, reporters from national news outlets, and researchers from around the world came to witness the incredible bond between the boy who had found his voice and the bison who had found his peace. Sam Holloway, once the sanctuary's most cynical ranger, now telling and preparing this story, took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Found himself leading tours, his stories of Chief's rage replaced with tales of his profound gentleness. We thought we were giving him a second chance, Sam would tell the gathered crowds, his voice thick with emotion. Turns out he was the one giving us a second chance to see what's possible when you stop trying to fix something and just try to understand it. A major philanthropic foundation dedicated to animal welfare and child therapy funded the construction of the Leo and Chief Center for Interspecies Healing, a state-of-the-art facility at the sanctuary. It was designed to study and replicate the conditions that had led to their breakthrough, pairing traumatized animals with children who were struggling to connect with the human world. Dr. Finch's research, published in prestigious scientific journals, challenged decades of conventional wisdom about animal behavior. He proved that what many had dismissed as anthropomorphism, the attribution of human emotions to animals, was in fact a complex and observable reality. Chief and Leo taught us that core emotions like empathy, trust, and the need for connection are not exclusively human. Dr. Finch explained in a widely watched documentary, they are a universal language shared by sentient beings. We just needed to learn how to listen. Leo, now 9 years old, was the center's heart. He had blossomed into a bright, articulate boy who still preferred the company of animals to large crowds of people. He spent his afternoons at the sanctuary, working alongside the staff, helping to care for the new animals that arrived, many of whom were considered lost causes, just as Chief had been, he possessed an intuitive understanding of their fear and pain and empathy, born from his own journey through silence and sorrow his bond with. Chief remained the core of his world, the giant. Bison was now fully mature, a magnificent patriarch of the plains who treated Leo with a reverence that never failed to astonish onlookers. He would follow the boy around the expanded enclosure like a loyal shadow, his massive head often resting on Leo's shoulder as they sat together watching the sunset over the Wyoming hills. One afternoon, a little girl named Maya, who had been rescued from an abusive home and hadn't spoken since her ordeal, arrived at the center. She was terrified of everyone and everything, hiding behind her foster mother's legs and refusing to make eye contact. Leo approached her not with words, but with a quiet patience he had learned from Chief. He simply sat on the ground a few feet away and started to draw in the dirt. After a while he sketched a picture of a giant bison. Maya peeked out from behind her mother's coat, her eyes widening with curiosity. Leo then drew a small boy beside the bison, and then he looked at Maya and offered her the stick he was using as a pencil. Slowly, cautiously, the little girl stepped forward. She took the stick, and next to the boy in the drawing, she drew a small girl. Chief, who had been watching from his enclosure, let out a soft rumble, a sound of welcome. David watched the scene unfold, his heart full of a gratitude so profound it felt like it might burst. He remembered the desperate father who had arrived at this sanctuary 2 years ago, willing to try anything to save his son. Now his son was the one doing the saving, not with grand gestures or complicated therapies, but with the simple, profound power of a shared understanding. The center helped hundreds of children and animals in the years that followed. Each success story, a testament to the miracle that began with one boy and one bison. Leo grew into a young man, his future path clear. He planned to become a veterinarian specializing in animal behavioral science and trauma recovery. He knew that his life's purpose was to be a voice for the voiceless, to continue the work that Chief had started within him. On the sanctuary's 10th anniversary, a ceremony was held to honor the incredible journey that had transformed a small, struggling refuge into a world-renowned center for healing. Leo stood before the crowd, his voice clear and strong. "People always ask me what the secret is," he said as Chief stood peacefully behind him, a gentle giant in the fading sunlight. "They ask how we heal these animals that everyone else has given up on. The secret is simple. We don't see them as broken. We see them as brave for having survived. We don't try to erase their scars. We honor them as proof of their strength. And most importantly, we remember that the quietest souls often have the most to say. You just have to be willing to listen, not with your ears, but with your heart." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the plains, Leo walked over to Chief and wrapped his arms around the bison's massive neck. The boy who was lost in silence and the beast who was lost in rage had found more than just a second chance. They had found a purpose, they had found a home, and they had found it in each other, proving to the world that the most powerful healing doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from creating a connection so strong it makes the broken pieces whole again. What do you believe is the greatest lesson animals can teach us about our own humanity? Have you ever had a connection with an animal that changed your life? Forever share your story, and let's celebrate the silent language of love that connects all living things. The years that followed the sanctuary's 10th anniversary were a golden age for the Blackfoot River Wildlife Sanctuary. The story of Leo and Chief had become a modern fable, a touchstone for conversations about trauma healing and the boundless potential of interspecies connection. Leo, now a lanky teenager of 16, moved with a quiet confidence that was a world away from the silent, haunted child who had first arrived. His voice, once a fragile whisper, was now steady and calm, though he used it sparingly, preferring to communicate through the intuitive language of action and empathy. He had become the sanctuary's junior lead, a prodigy in the field of animal behavior, whose insights often surpassed those of seasoned experts. He worked with a focus that was almost meditative, mucking out enclosures, mending fences, and most importantly, sitting with the new arrivals, the broken souls that other institutions had labeled as hopeless. There was a grizzly bear named Scar who had been blinded in one eye by a hunter's trap and would lash out in fear at any sudden noise. Leo had spent 6 months just sitting outside his den, humming the same low tune until the day the massive bear had emerged and allowed Leo to gently clean his wounded face. There was a pack of gray wolves rescued from an illegal breeding mill, so traumatized they cowered in the corners of their enclosure, refusing to eat. Leo had not tried to approach them. Instead, he had brought Chief to the fence line. The giant bison's calm, powerful presence seemed to transmit a message of safety to the terrified canines, and slowly, day by day, they had begun to heal, their pack structure reforming under the watchful eye of the boy and the bison. And at the center of it all was Chief, the patriarch of the plains. His bond with Leo had deepened into a profound partnership that was the bedrock of the sanctuary's philosophy. The giant bison was no longer just a resident, he was a collaborator, a co-therapist, whose gentle wisdom guided Leo's own. He would often position himself near the enclosure of a new animal, his silent presence a powerful anchor that seemed to say, "I was once lost too, you are safe here." The sanctuary itself had grown into a sprawling haven, a testament to the generosity their story had inspired. New state-of-the-art enclosures blended seamlessly into the landscape. There was a fully equipped veterinary hospital and a research library that housed the world's foremost collection of studies on animal emotional intelligence. David Miller watched his son's work with a heart full of quiet pride. The lines of worry that had once been etched so deeply into his face had softened. He was no longer just a desperate father, but the proud director of a place that performed miracles daily. Sam Holloway, the grizzled old ranger, had retired from his official duties, but he remained at the sanctuary as a resident storyteller, his cynicism long since boy's impossible calm. His primal fear of the fire was held at bay by his absolute trust in the young man leading him. He became an island of tranquility in the heart of the inferno, his massive body shielding Leo from the worst of the heat and flying debris. They passed the smoldering remains of the observation deck, the place where their journey had truly begun. They walked past the charred husk of the bench where a small, silent boy had first watched a broken beast. They were walking through the ashes of their own history, a history that was being forged anew in the crucible of the fire. The other animals seemed to sense the significance of their passage. The wolves emerged from the smoke, falling into a loose formation behind the bison, following their lead. The deer and other smaller creatures of the sanctuary joined the strange exodus, a river of life flowing through a sea of destruction. David and Sam followed in a truck, loaded with the last of the equipment, watching the unbelievable procession with tears streaming down their smoke-stained faces. They were witnessing something biblical, something that would be told in stories for generations to come. The boy who walked through fire, leading the animals to salvation. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a shimmering line through the trees. The Blackfoot River, its waters a promise of relief and life. They scrambled down the muddy bank, Leo leading Chief straight into the cool, shallow water. The giant bison submerged himself with a great sigh of relief, the steam rising from his singed coat. Leo splashed water on his own face, washing away the ash and grime. He leaned his forehead against Chief's wet flank, exhausted but safe. As they stood in the river, they turned and looked back. The main firefront had reached the sanctuary buildings, the veterinary hospital, the research center, the small cabin where Leo had spoken his first word in years, were all consumed by the flames. They watched their home, their life's work, turn to ash and cinders under a blood-red sky. Yet here in the river, surrounded by the animals they had saved, a different feeling began to take root. It was not despair. It was a profound and fierce sense of triumph. They had lost their sanctuary, but they had not lost its soul. Its heart was standing right here beside them, a boy and a bison who had faced the inferno and walked through it together in the ashes of what was. Can hope survive? And is a home a place, or is it the unbreakable bond that walks with you through the fire? Dawn broke, pale and gray, over a landscape of devastation. The world was rendered in shades of black and charcoal, a silent testament to the fury of the fire that had swept through the valley. The air was still thick with the chemical tang of smoke, but the monstrous roar of the flames had been replaced by an eerie quiet. The survivors, Leo, his father, the handful of staff, and their menagerie of rescued animals were huddled on the far bank of the Blackfoot River, a small island of life in a sea of desolation. Chief stood at the center of the group, a stoic mountain of resilience. His massive presence, a calming influence on the other animals, the wolf pack, which would normally never venture so closely, exhausted nearby, their usual wariness replaced by a shared sense of ordeal. Scar the grizzly paced restlessly in his transport cage, but his roars had subsided into low grumbles. They had survived, but as the sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the destruction, a heavy grief settled over them. The sanctuary was gone, not just damaged, but utterly erased from the landscape. The dream they had built from nothing had been reclaimed by the wilderness in the most brutal way imaginable. David sat on the riverbank, his head in his hands. The weight of the loss was crushing, but then he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Leo standing over him, his face smudged with soot, his clothes torn, but his eyes clear and full of a strength that seemed far beyond his years. "We saved them, Dad," Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. "We saved them all." And in that moment, David understood his son was right. The buildings were just wood and steel. The true sanctuary, the spirit of it, was alive and well in the motley crew of survivors gathered on the riverbank. It was in Sam Holloway, already making a list of needed supplies. It was in the vet tech gently tending to a burn on a young deer's leg. And it was in Leo, his son, who had faced down his own personal inferno years ago and had emerged with the courage to walk through a real one. The news of their miraculous escape had already spread like the fire itself. A local news helicopter had captured the incredible footage of Leo leading Chief and the other animals through the flames. The images were breathtakingly cinematic. A lone boy and a giant beast walking calmly through a wall of fire, a real-life fable of trust and courage, broadcast to a world hungry for hope by midday. The story had gone global. The sanctuary's website, which was hosted on an off-site server, crashed from the traffic. Donations began to pour in, first as a trickle, then a stream, then a flood. People from every corner of the world, moved by the story of unparalleled bravery and the unbreakable bond between a boy and a bison, opened their hearts and their wallets. Offers of help came from everywhere. Construction companies pledged materials and labor ranchers offered temporary shelter for the animals. Volunteers from across the country packed their cars and started driving toward Wyoming, a grassroots army of hope mobilizing in real time. A temporary command center was established in a nearby town, and what had felt like an onward had felt like an ending began to transform into a new beginning. The process of rebuilding was arduous and slow, but it was fueled by a powerful sense of shared purpose. The community that had once been inspired by the sanctuary now became its foundation. They cleared the charred debris, laid new foundations, and raised new walls stronger and more fire-resistant than before. During this time, Chief became a legend in his own right. He was no longer just a symbol of healing. He was a symbol of survival. His calm demeanor and protective nature over the other displaced animals became the sanctuary's guiding principle. He had proven that the greatest leaders are not those who seek power, but those who offer protection in times of crisis. A year later, a new Blackfoot River Wildlife Sanctuary rose from the ashes. It was more than a collection of buildings. It was a fortress of hope, designed in harmony with the wildness it served, with fire breaks, natural water barriers, and buildings made from sustainable fire-resistant materials. At the grand reopening ceremony, Leo, now 17, stood on a hill overlooking the reborn sanctuary. Chief stood beside him, his familiar solid presence a comforting weight against Leo's side. He looked out at the new enclosures, at the families and children exploring the grounds, at his father and Sam shaking hands with smiling donors and volunteers. He had learned a profound lesson in the fire. He had learned that homes can burn, that things can be lost, but that love and trust are fireproof. They are the essential elements that allow a soul and a community to be reborn stronger and more beautiful than before. A year ago, the world watched as we lost our home. Leo said into the microphone, his voice carrying over the crowd. But they were wrong. We didn't lose our home because our home was never the buildings. Our home is the belief that every life is worth saving. It's the courage to walk into the fire for something you love. And it's the promise that no matter how dark it gets, we will always be there to lead each other into the light. He finished speaking and turned to Chief, placing his hand on the great bison's forehead. The animal that had once been the symbol of untamable rage was now the symbol of unbreakable hope. The boy who had been trapped in silence was now a voice. For the voiceless together, they had taught the world a lesson that would echo for generations to come. What rises from the ashes is often stronger than what stood before, for in the end we learned that the fiercest fires cannot destroy a love that was destined to heal the world. The decade following the Great Fire was one of profound growth and quiet consolidation. The Blackfoot River Wildlife Sanctuary, reborn from its own ashes, became the global standard for compassionate wildlife rehabilitation. Its philosophy, born from the bond between a silent boy and a broken bison, was now a curriculum studied at universities worldwide. Leo, now a young man of 21, was the living embodiment of that philosophy. His lanky frame had filled out, and while his demeanor remained thoughtful and reserved, he moved with the self-assurance of a master craftsman in his workshop. He was a whisperer, not just to animals, but to the very soul of the wilderness. He was finishing his undergraduate degree in animal science through a remote program, his practical experience at the sanctuary far outweighing anything he could learn in a traditional classroom. Chief, in his venerable old age, had transitioned from a patient to a patriarch. His massive, shaggy form was the sanctuary's steady heartbeat. He was no longer just Leo's companion. He was a mentor to the other animals. His presence at the fence line of a new, terrified arrival was a kind of silent benediction, a message that resonated deeper than any human attempt at comfort. The sanctuary had become a place of such consistent success that the staff sometimes joked that the greatest challenge they faced was complacency. They had built a perfect system, a haven so effective that it seemed no soul was beyond its reach. But the wild has a way of reminding even the most confident of humans that there are always new languages of pain to learn. The challenge arrived. On a cold November morning, in a climate-controlled transport truck under federal escort. Inside was an animal unlike any they had ever encountered. Her name was Zoya, a Siberian tiger confiscated from the fortified estate of a fallen oligarch. She was a ghost, a creature of breathtaking beauty and terrifying emptiness. Her amber eyes held no rage, no fear, not even sadness. They held a chilling, intelligent void. She had been raised in a gilded cage, a living status symbol, declawed and defanged of her true nature. Yet she had somehow retained an aura of lethality that was more unnerving than any open display of aggression. For weeks, Zoya was a phantom in her state-of-the-art enclosure. She ate only when no one was watching, moved like a wisp of smoke at the edge of vision, and refused to acknowledge any attempt at connection. She ignored the enrichment toys, the varied scents, and the calming music. She treated the presence of humans with a disdain so absolute it felt like a judgment. Leo, for the first time in his life, felt utterly lost. He tried all his proven methods. He sat in silence for hours, projecting the same calm energy that had soothed dozens of other animals. Zoya ignored him. He brought Chief to the fence line, a tactic that had never failed. The old bison stood his ground, a pillar of peaceful strength, but Zoya merely glanced at the giant beast with an indifference that was almost insulting, then melted back into the shadows of her den. Failure was a foreign concept to Leo. His gift had always been as natural as breathing. Now faced with this beautiful, empty creature, he began to question everything. The quiet confidence that had defined him began to fray at the edges. His Work with other animals became methodical, lacking the intuitive spark that was his signature. His father noticed the change. "You can't save them all, son," David said one evening as they watched the security monitor showing Zoya pacing. A silent, relentless ghost. "We knew this day would come. Some wounds are just too deep." But for Leo, accepting this felt like a betrayal of the sanctuary's very soul. If they couldn't reach Zoya, then was their philosophy just a lucky break with a bison years ago? Was his entire life built on a single, unrepeatable miracle? The self-doubt coincided with a pivotal moment in his life. Acceptance letters from the country's most prestigious veterinary schools had begun to arrive. Cornell, UC Davis, Tufts. They were his future, a path to the wider world he knew he had to eventually walk. But how could he leave when he was facing the first true test of his life and failing so completely? The letters sat on his desk, unopened. The crisis came to a head when Zoya stopped eating altogether. She grew gaunt, her magnificent coat losing its luster. The void in her eyes seemed to be consuming her from within. The sanctuary's board of directors held a somber meeting. The word euthanasia was spoken for the first time in years, not as a recommendation, but as a sad looming possibility. The sanctuary that promised a second chance to all was facing an animal it could only offer a peaceful death. That night, Leo walked out to Chief's enclosure under a sky filled with sharp winter stars. The old bison saw him coming and met him at the fence, his warm breath misting in the cold air. Leo didn't speak. He just leaned his forehead against the familiar solid warmth of his oldest friend and let the wave of failure and confusion wash over him. He wasn't seeking an answer from Chief anymore. He was just seeking solace, the unconditional acceptance that had been the foundation of his entire life. And in that quiet moment of surrender, the answer came. It wasn't a flash of insight, but a slow, dawning realization. He had been approaching Zoya with the arrogance of a healer. He had been trying to fix her, to apply his own story of healing onto hers. He had been seeing her as a problem to be solved, not as a sovereign being with her own story, her own pain, and her own right to it. He had been speaking, but he had not been truly listening. Zoya didn't need another compassionate human trying to save her. She had been surrounded by humans her whole life, humans who had turned her into a pet, a possession, a project. She didn't need another attempt to control her reality. She needed someone to finally acknowledge it. With a newfound clarity, Leo walked to Zoya's enclosure. The security lights cast long shadows, and the air was still and cold. He didn't enter the safety corridor. He sat on the frozen ground outside the main fence, making himself small, vulnerable. He didn't project calm. He didn't try to manage his energy. For the first time, he let his own feelings of failure, of sadness, of being lost, radiate from him without filter. He looked at the den where she was hidden and he began to speak, his voice barely a whisper in the vast Wyoming night. "I don't know how to help you," he said, the admission a painful release. "Everything I thought I knew, it doesn't work with you. You single quotes different. I think maybe you're stronger than I am. You survived them. You survived everything they did to you, and you didn't let them break your spirit. You just hid it away where no one else could touch it. I can't fix you, Zoya. I don't even have the right to try. But I see you. I see how strong you are." He sat there for an hour, speaking his truth, admitting his failure, honoring her strength. He expected nothing in return. When he finally rose to leave, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the den. Zoya moved to the edge of the enclosure, her form still shrouded in shadow, but she was closer than she had ever been. She sat, and for the first time, her amber eyes met his, and the void was gone. In its place was a flicker. It was not trust. It was not affection. It was recognition. She was seeing him, a fellow being who had finally stopped trying to change her and had simply acknowledged who she was. The breakthrough wasn't a sudden taming. It was the quiet, fragile beginning of a conversation. The next day, she ate a small piece of meat he left for her while he watched from a distance. A week later, she emerged from her den while he was present, lying in a patch of sun and watching him with her intelligent, assessing eyes. It was a new kind of healing, one based not on submission, but on mutual respect for each other's power and past. It was a partnership of survivors. This profound, subtle victory gave Leo the clarity he needed. He opened his acceptance letters. He would go to Cornell. But his decision was not about leaving. It was about preparing to return. He would study veterinary medicine, yes, but also genetics, conservation policy, and global wildlife management. He would gather the world's knowledge and bring it back to this small patch of Wyoming that had taught him more than any university ever could. His gift wasn't a magic trick that only worked on home soil. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that he could now enrich with science and skill, and in turn, share with a world that desperately needed it. On the day he left for college, the entire sanctuary staff gathered to see him off. Sam gave him a bone-crushing hug, and his father looked at him with a pride that needed no words. His last goodbye was with Chief. He walked out to the pasture where the great bison now roamed freely, his old age having earned him a retirement from all enclosures. The patriarch of the plains ambled over, his massive head lowering to rest against Leo's chest. "I'll be back, old friend," Leo whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't goodbye." Chief huffed softly, a familiar sound of agreement and contentment. As Leo drove away, he looked in his rearview mirror. Chief hadn't moved. He was standing on the hill, a steadfast silhouette against the vast Wyoming sky, watching his boy go out into the world, not to leave his home behind, but to learn how to build it everywhere. The journey that had begun with a silent child and a broken beast had come full circle, not to an end, but to a new, more expansive beginning, ready to carry its quiet message of hope to all the wild, broken, and beautiful places of the earth. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.